there is a something very beautiful about the fact that feelings are spontaneously, naturally conscious events. That's where consciousness begins. That is the thesis of Feeling and Knowing, my new book. And they are completely tied, which really means that consciousness is completely tied with the process of life regulation, which, as you pointed out, is none other than homeostasis.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Chasing Consciousness. I really hope you guys are enjoying this second series. We're really getting into the thick of it now. So today we have the fascinating topic of understanding how emotions play a part in reason. We're also going to be confronting how feeling is different from sensing, and if feelings can tell us anything about the evolution of human consciousness. So to get to grips with this, I have the honor of calling on a hugely influential Portuguese neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio. Damasio is professor of psychology, philosophy and neurology at the University of Southern California, and he's the founder of their important Brain and Creativity Institute. Damasio has written many important books, perhaps most importantly Descartes' Error, Emotion, Reason and the Human Brain, and just out this year is the subject of most of our discussion for today, Feeling and Knowing, Making Minds Conscious. So I have to thank for all of this our previous guest, Jonas Kaplan. Go back to his episode about the backfire effect if you're interested in the psychology of belief, who works for Professor Damasio at USC, and thank you so much to him for arranging this interview. Just defining feelings and emotions is hard enough. So having the man responsible for defining their importance to human rationality is a massive bit of a luck for us, the listeners here on Chasing Consciousness. So without further ado, let's go. Professor Antonio Damasio, what a great honor to have you with us. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
So you're one of the many, many scientists that has a huge interest in creativity. And in fact, you named your institute, the one that you founded at the University of Southern California, the Brain and Creativity Institute. And Jonas Kaplan told me that you've even included a concert hall in its design. Now, imagination, intuition, and creativity have been so important in so many great discoveries of history. Tell us, why is creativity so important to you personally and also to science?
Well, practically everything interesting that we do requires creativity, whether it is what you decide to do on a certain day, which places you're going to visit, the friends that you're going to be with, even what you're going to eat. It involves choices. It involves having out of a menu of possibilities, making a choice. And then, if it's really going to be creative, it involves adding something, some new combination of ingredients, some new combination of elements that will allow you to do something new. And that something new will be tested by what it gives you. It may be tested by giving you pleasure, more than you would have if you didn't have that magic combination, or it may be tested by giving you something completely novel that may help others, whether it is an idea or an object or an action. But it has to do with adding out of a particular combination, out of a particular brew, adding something that is new to the existing world. And that's what creativity is all about. And it's a peculiar trait we have. Most creatures on Earth living creatures are not creative, but we are, and that's wonderful. And there's this process of addition, of accrual of new abilities.
And why did you include it in the title of your institute?
Because it is so important, and because I wanted the institute to be focused on, actually, it was not me alone, it was me and my wife. We wanted it to be connected with a novelty scientifically, but also novelty in a wider domain, which includes the arts. We're passionate music lovers, so having an auditorium with great acoustics where musicians could do their thing or actors could do their thing was important. And where also, scientists talking about their work could do their thing at a podium and present their ideas.
And tell us about creativity in science. It's often sort of completely separated, isn't it? This world of science and the world of the arts, but actually they're very much intertwined. Tell us, what's your experience of that creativity in the scientific process?
Well, the processes are extremely similar. Being creative in the arts or in business or in science is exactly the same thing. It's the substrate that is different, and the rules that apply to what is considered novel, of course, are different as well. In the arts, one is relatively relaxed about what is considered creative and novel. In the sciences, we have a much stricter way of analyzing what's done and whether that is really new, whether that adds something to the past history. But that's really the difference. There is a strict test of novelty in science, or there can be, which does not necessarily apply in the wider world of the arts.
Well, I was just thinking how exciting and unique. I mean, there are so many brilliant examples from all of our most influential scientists of these moments of insight, these flashes of creativity and creating these solutions which would have taken hundreds of years to do by a sort of painstaking process. And creativity and intuition just gives us that flash that really speeds up the process.
Yeah, but creativity is not, one thing is to have the brilliant flash and to have the sudden jump to a particular fact, to a particular conclusion. Another, creativity is broader than that. What you're describing with a sudden flash is a particularly admirable kind of creativity, but creativity is broader than that. Creativity is about constructing something that did not exist before, or did not exist before in quite the same way. And it can be incredibly slow. It doesn't need to be in a flash. I think we are very taken by bright flashes, the bright flash that occurs to the physicist that suddenly sees something that was not seen before, or at least not in his mind. But creativity is broader than that. It's about the possibility of combining elements in a way that is novel, combining elements in a way that was not there before. And it doesn't make any difference what the thing that is being combined is. It just has to have a novelty of pattern. That's what creativity is all about.
Now, Antonio, I hope you will not mind, but before we get on to the new book, Feeling and Knowing, Making Minds Conscious, there are a couple of key ideas that have made your work just so influential in the field that I think that me and the listeners, as lay people, should just clarify before, so we can fully absorb what you propose in the new book. So in your hugely influential book, Descartes Error, you call out Descartes' claim that the mind and the body are separated. And one factor here is that your work has shown that emotions and feelings are crucial to reasoning and decision making. So without getting too technical, can you explain the data that brought you to this conclusion that emotions play a part in reason and roughly how the process works?
Yeah. Well, the fundamental idea in Descartes' Error, as you say, is that there is, in very broad terms, a traditional separation between that which belongs to the mind versus that which belongs to the body. And Descartes is one of many people that is emblematic of that general position, although one could discuss that in details that are not so clear-cut. Would not make it as clear-cut. But nonetheless, the point I was trying to make, and it's an important one, is that the two things are really together. And certainly the mechanisms that we use in our living bodies to generate mental states are hooked to the body, are occurring in the body, and one could make the perfectly seemingly exotic, but not really, proposal that what we call mind is in fact physical, and that all of it is physical. So it's not only Descartes' error, but it's the error of those who think that mental aspects and physical aspects are very far apart. And this is a huge problem, and it's a problem that has generated things. Your program is called Chasing Consciousness, and one area of big problem is exactly consciousness, because there are people that will feel very disturbed by the idea that you have something like the brain, which is supposed to be a physical organ, generating something like the mind, and the conscious mind at that, which is something supposed to be not physical. And this is, of course, complete nonsense, because but all of it is physical. All of it is occurring in a physical realm, and you have to. And there are other problems with that statement. One of them being that what we generate as mind and what we generate as a conscious mind is not coming only from the brain. And one of the points of the new book, Feeling and Knowing, is trying to make, in as simple way as possible, trying to make the point that the mind and the conscious mind don't come out of the brain alone. They come out of a living organism that has, yes, a nervous system, which we call generally the brain, and has the rest of the living organism, which is the body. And the two things are totally intertwined. And the creation of minds and the creation of conscious minds is a result of the interaction of that body and nervous system. And so it's not the realm of the nervous system. People are, it's lovely to have something called neuroscience. It's lovely to study the nervous system, but one should not attribute to the nervous system powers that it does not have. And the power to generate minds and consciousness does not belong to the nervous system alone. It belongs to a class of living organisms that does have nervous systems. But that's a different and more subtle point. In Descartes' Error, there was one particular set of findings that we had, which showed clearly that individuals that had lost the ability to use emotions, and not just emotions and feelings, properly, in fact, were deprived of a lot of their emotiveness, that such individuals reasoned very poorly, which made a direct link between this ability to have affect, to have feelings and emotions, and the possibility of reasoning decently and correctly. So the specific point in Descartes' Error is that if your affectivity is compromised, if you do not have normal processes of emotion and feeling, you are not going to have a normal process of reasoning you're not going to have a normal process of decision making. The two things are tied. And the beauty of the idea there was to say, look, emotions and feelings clearly are in the realm of the body, clearly are in the realm of the physical organism, because emotions are actions that we deploy in a living body, and that will change the mask of our faces or the positioning of our body, whether we're showing happiness or fear or anger. We are acting out. They're collections of actions. This is very physical, very externally oriented. Feelings are subjective states, because feelings are about how we perceive, how we get states of our body. You know, the fundamental feelings that we have available are feelings such as thirst, hunger, well-being, pain, malaise. All of these are physical states that are being represented mentally, and that is what we call a feeling. But the beauty of all this is that it's all about the body. So the sort of pirouette that I was doing in Descartes Error was to say, look, here we have all these things that are in the realm of the body, that are very physical, and they are having an absolutely important role in how you reason, in how you arrive at good or bad conclusions, correct or incorrect conclusions.
And that connects a little bit with a second crucial concept in your work, which is that of homeostatic feelings and states. Tell us, what exactly are homeostatic states and feelings, and why are they so important for your approach?
Right. So first, let's start with what is homeostasis. Homeostasis is about life regulation. So you talk about homeostasis as a way of referring to all the mechanisms, all the strategies that any living organism utilizes in order to run its life. Whether you have a single cell bacterium or a complex creature like you or me, there is a homeostatic regulatory program that has to be executed. And homeostasis presents itself to the world through feelings, and very specific feelings at that. You have feelings, I actually named a few of them just a couple of minutes ago. Feelings such as hunger, thirst, well-being, pain, malaise, desire. All of these are states of life, and they are, through feeling, they are telling you, the person who owns the body, the person who owns that life, that the organism is in need of something. When you are thirsty, the feeling is telling you in a direct, immediate, conscious manner that you need water to be given to that organism, which is your organism. And if you are hungry, that conscious feeling of hunger is telling you that energy sources are needed in your body, or else you're going to get sick and die. And when you have pain, you have a conscious feeling that something is definitely very wrong in your organism. Something, for example, that may have been an injury to a part of that living organism, or a disease process that is consuming that organism. So in nature and in evolution, consciousness actually evolved through the process of feeling. Feeling was the inaugural manifestation of consciousness. And it's right there to give you information on how to maintain life. So the beauty of it, which you should mark for your listeners and viewers, is that it is totally consumed and devoted to the process of homeostasis. So if you could ask me, why do we have feelings? Why do we have consciousness? Well, those are actually questions that we can answer today. We have feelings because they will help you run your life. And once you become conscious of the fact that you are in pain or that you are thirsty or hungry, you have a possibility of doing something about what is lacking in your organism or what's wrong in your organism. And by the way, something that is very interesting is that if you are in a state of well-being, if you are in perfect bliss, that's also telling you something very useful. It's telling you that you don't need to worry about your organism right now, and you can devote yourself to other things, like, for example, having fun, procreating, doing whatever you want. So there is something very beautiful about the fact that feelings are spontaneously, naturally conscious events. That's where consciousness begins. That is the thesis of Feeling and Knowing, my new book. And they are completely tied, which really means that consciousness is completely tied with the process of life regulation, which, as you pointed out, is none other than homeostasis.
Perfect. So this sets the scene beautifully for the new book. Congratulations. Feeling and Knowing, Making Minds Conscious. And it follows these two extremely strong themes in your work, those of feelings and that of conscious experience. Let's start with feelings. How is feeling different from sensing? And why is that distinction so important?
Well, sensing simply refers to the possibility of something being detected. So, for example, a bacterium can run into, say, a wall in a petri dish. And as it does so, there is in the membrane of that particular creature a way of detecting that there was an object that stopped it. That is sensing. When you sense something, it doesn't oblige you. Of course, in our language, we sort of transform the meanings of these words. But the sensing is simply a detection. And it doesn't mean that you know what you have detected. And it doesn't mean, unless that you represent mentally what you have just detected. These are completely different things. So sensing is about the process of detecting. There is no need for it to be represented. When you, for example, when I touch this pencil, I sense the substance of it, I sense the smoothness of the plastic material that it is made of, and I have the possibility at the same time of representing the shape of that pencil that I'm touching. But I didn't need to. I could perfectly well have detected this surface, but not represented it internally, and not have any experience of it in the proper sense.
It's perception, more or less.
It's very, very primitive perception. It's very simple perception. It's detection. It's detection of something that is there. But it does not require you to have the representation of that thing. When I use the term perception, I'm indicating that there's something of the structure, for example, that is being perceived. So to perceive this pencil would be to look at its cylindrical shape and its yellow color, for example. But to detect the pencil, to sense the pencil, it simply is a way of my skin touching it. And I made that detection. It said, check, it's there. Something is there. But I don't know if it's a pencil, and I don't know it's yellow, and I don't know it's cylindrical.
But these homeostatic feelings you're referring to, these are more interoceptive. Is that the difference?
They are totally interoceptive. They are totally about the interior. They are ways of not just detecting what is going on in the interior, but constructing some image of what is going on in the interior. So they go in the direction of perception. So it's not just sensing or detecting, it's already something more complex that could become a perception. In the case of the interior, actually, it becomes much more than a perception. It becomes a commingling of what is perceptual in the traditional sense, but it's mixed with the thing itself. See, what's so interesting about feelings is it's not that they are perceptions of the state of the body, is that they are fusions with the state of the body. To feel something is really to have a state of complete mixture with the body. So the nervous system on the one hand and the body structure on the other sort of fuse and intermingle. That's what is so particular about feeling. And this is something that is the key to developing consciousness, because if you didn't have this, you could not be conscious. And it's very clearly different from what happens, for example, when I am looking at you on the screen, or when I'm looking out at the scenery outside my windows. Because that is there, it's external to me, and it's being perceived in the true sense of the term, visually, for example. But with feeling, it's not just looking at something that is over there. It's looking at something that is interpenetrating. It is that confusion of the thing that is in the nervous system with the thing that is in the body. That's what gives rise to feeling. And that's what makes it special. It's not at all, and it's quite tragic that a lot of theorization about consciousness has started with the visual system. Because people reasoned totally incorrectly that because the visual system is the most evolved of our systems, because everything that has to do with vision is so complex, so refined, so minute in its detail, that consciousness would have to be linked to that thing that is so evolved. Well, wrong. Wrong, because consciousness started very early, it's very primitive, it's very basic, and then it allowed us to go on in terms of evolution to other more complex things. But that's the distinction between what belongs to highly evolved vision or hearing, for that matter, and what belongs to low, humble feelings. That distinction is very important.
And it's interesting that you mentioned this kind of confusion with interoception, because you used the word image, which we could connect to the idea of the body schema. It's very important to remember that is a schema. It's something that our mind is creating to represent. Now, you go on into a lot of detail. You've got lots of chapters on feelings. Is there anything else that you want to mention now and bring in about what you talk about feelings that the listeners need going forward in this conversation?
Well, I think that we've touched already on some of the most important aspects of this drama. And one that is very important for your listeners to understand is that there is a long history of evolution of living creatures. And without a doubt, they start with very simple creatures like single-cell bacteria, and you go on to have multiple cells and then multiple systems and greater complexity. It's also very important for people to realize that for a very long time in the history of life, there are no nervous systems. There's just the organism, the living organism with its cells, few or many, doesn't make any difference. Multiple systems or not, doesn't make any difference. There is no nervous system as such. Then at a certain point, organisms develop nervous systems. And they develop nervous systems, when we look in retrospect, for a very obvious reason. They had to coordinate multiplicity of systems. In other words, if you have what ends up being like a country with lots of cities and roads and so forth, you need some way of coordinating what is going on, or else you're going to have enormous confusion and conflict. Nervous systems are sort of traffic cops. They are there to maintain traffic, to avoid collisions and to allow for new things to develop out of the many combinations that we have available. It sort of brings you back to the beginning of the conversation on creativity. And then once you have nervous systems, there appear this marvelous thing we've been talking about, which is feelings. This possibility of commingling the things that have to do with the body that has been evolving for millennia with the nervous system that is more recent. And it's in that interpenetration that you get the beginning of feeling. And feeling then allows you to generate something that one could call a self, because it allows the organism that is having the feelings a certain degree of individuality, a certain degree of separation from the rest. It's me and my feelings, but me is made of my feelings. And that begins very early in very simple organisms. And then, of course, as the nervous system evolves, you have all this possibility of having touch and vision and hearing and smell and taste. And that enriches the way in which you represent the world outside. But let's not forget that the only way you know that there is that world outside is through the fact that you are conscious. And you are conscious because of how you get to represent your own interior, your own organism, and how the two things fuse to create this beautiful thing called feeling. That's the key to consciousness. And of course, it's also the key to knowledge. The reason why I've titled this book, which is a sort of a tricky book, because on purpose I made it as simple as I could, with very brief chapters, in order to try to have the ideas clear. One doesn't succeed in doing that as one wishes. It's easier to dream of it than to achieve it. But the idea is to have very clearly marked areas of interest in this big story of minds and conscious minds. But the feeling and knowing partnership is very interesting, because feeling allows you to know. What does it allow you to know? First and foremost, the state of your body. Feelings were, quote unquote, invented by nature to allow you to know what is the state of life in your organism. And that is why there's this close connection to these trivial, trite things such as hunger, thirst, desire, pain, well-being, malaise. All of this is very trite, but it isn't, of course, because it's about your life.
Now, an important area in these exponential developments in science that you talk about in the book that have given us so much more insight recently is in artificial intelligence, which we're going to be covering on the show in detail because it's an important time for the development of AI. Why are artificial minds important for the future of consciousness research?
Well, artificial minds are important. Well, a lot of artificial intelligence does not have minds in the proper sense. I mean, there are many ways of having intelligent devices that don't have a mind at all. And of course, artificial devices are not going to have minds in the way we do, and they're not going to have consciousness in the way we do, for the very simple fact that they are not alive.
They have no nervous system, which is what you're mentioning.
And they have no life. In other words, they're not in the danger of getting sick, for example. Sickness for, say, a robot would be by taking an axe to it and breaking it in pieces. That's a strange kind of sickness. At any rate, there is a way, we think, and this is something that we've been developing with colleagues here at the Institute, the idea that somehow if artificial intelligence devices would be a little bit like us, in the sense that they would be vulnerable like we are, it might add a dimension to their intelligence. Because, of course, robots can be already extremely intelligent and do amazing things. But at the same time, they clearly lack certain things that are very typical of our intelligence, which we think have to do with the fact that our intelligence developed out of vulnerability. We were perishable. We were constantly at the mercy of energy procurement. We need to, and that's why feelings of hunger or thirst are so important, because they tell you, go do this or else something is going to happen to you. So when you ask me about artificial intelligence, the questions that come up are artificial intelligence devices like us? No, they're not. They're intelligent, and that's great and good and useful, but they're not like us, because our intelligence developed out of need, developed out of coping with the needs of life. Life is a very complicated thing. As Alfred Hitchcock would say, it's a very dangerous thing.
I'm a huge fan of Hitchcock. I'm sorry we don't have enough time to go into it today. I would love to speak about it. So just to clarify then, are you of the school that would say, under no circumstances, even artificial intelligence that became aware of its own perishability, because obviously artificial intelligence would have their own potential risks to their existence, even if it got to that level, even if it had been, as AGI eventually will do, artificial general intelligence will be made to copy us as precisely as possible, presumably also in our vulnerabilities and other elements. Are you of the school that even under those circumstances of advanced development, there is no way they could have any sense of being sentient or of being feeling? That is really physically impossible, in your opinion?
No, I don't think it's physically impossible. I think there are ways. It would be almost like copying what we are. If you would copy the kinds of mechanisms that are behind feeling, in other words, you would have to introduce the elements in the robot that are like our molecular processes that maintain life, something that would be a sketch of that and how that is managed. Then we would have things that would be approximations of feeling. But I think that the word to use is approximation, because it's not going to be the kind of thing that we have. And the kind of thing, one of the big problems with the world of consciousness and how it has gone is that, unfortunately, it has developed on this wrong assumption, which I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, that all of this stuff is coming from our brain. And that's complete poppycock. It's not out of our brain. It's coming out of a living organism where, yes, the nervous system is important, plays a critical role. I mean, without the nervous system, there's no consciousness, obviously. There's no feeling. But it's not just the nervous system. And the rhymes and reasons for consciousness have to do with life and a living organism primarily, not with the nervous system. The nervous system is an interesting set of devices that evolution added on to our organisms, which is terrific, and which has, among other things, allowed us to have this conversation now, thanks to all its late developments. But it's not just the nervous system. The nervous system is a servant of living organisms.
Coming back to artificial intelligence's ability to potentially copy really, really well. I know that now AI developers, they're using neural network models to try and get closer to an exact copy of a sort of human brain's approach. And what interests me, and I'd be interested to get your take on this, you mentioned, it would be nothing more than an analogy of our feelings. But the thing is what's interesting, in the same way that we would feel as if they were conscious because they would be so good at copying it, I wonder if they would feel as if they were conscious, even though they were only copying it and had been programmed to copy it. That experience would be so close that even they wouldn't know the difference. I wonder what the ethical implications of that are.
Well, the ethical implications are considerable, because if they would have something like, say, suffering, there would be considerable ethical implications. But I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's likely, because we deal the things we feel and how we portray our life internally has to do with the material structure that allows that life to be. In other words, we feel because we have certain biological processes, because we have certain molecules, because we have certain kinds of cells arranged in a certain way. So that's outside of the realm of the robot, because I mean, if the robot would have exactly the same kind of structure, then it would be us, not the robot. So it's never going to be like that. That's a given. And I think that what we feel and the kind of drama that or glory that we can construct in our minds is tied to the way we are physically, is tied to our molecules, our flesh. And that's what's so intriguing about this. And I'm always very astonished by people who don't realize this and who want to see our minds as something else that does not have to do with this physicality, and where you can end up saying what to me can sound monstrous. So how can we understand the physical structure generating mind? Well, there's no other way. It's the physical structures of our kind generate minds of our kind. It's interwoven.
Mm. So the other main theme in the book is the other main theme in all of your work, this conscious experience we've been discussing. And in this book, you are quite bold and confident in that you say that the recent developments in biology and neuroscience and psychology can actually solve the famous hard problem of consciousness that some philosophers claim isn't a solvable problem because it's a subjective question. That's a really bold statement. And I know you're also a philosophy professor as well, so I'm sure you're aware of the implications of that claim. Can you join the dots for us here, Professor Damasio? Because it's often these big multidisciplinary pictures that really does give us the full insight that would allow us to solve a problem like that. Which developments in particular are you referring to?
Well, I think that we have already covered a lot of it. I will have to repeat a little bit.
Particularly with reference to the hard problem, because it's obviously famously difficult to solve, isn't it?
Well, it's claimed famously to be famously difficult to solve. I don't think it is. I have a lot of admiration for having it worded the way the philosopher David Chalmers worded it. I just happen not to agree. But I think the crux of the matter is the description of the problem as one of trying to imagine how something which is mental, which is a state of consciousness in your mind, something mental, could originate in something physical like the nervous system or the brain. That is the hard problem, is this abyss between the mentality on the one hand and the physicality on the other. How can the physical give rise to the mental? And the problem dissolves once you realize that the mental, in all its manifestations, remains physical. And there are several problems with the heart problem. One is the claim or the appearance that consciousness and mind is coming out of the brain and of the brain alone, or the nervous system. It doesn't make any difference the way you describe it. It's brain or nervous system. And I think that's false. I don't think the nervous system alone generates minds or generates consciousness. The nervous system inside a body, inside a living body, as servant to that body, can, in interactions with the body, generate minds and generate consciousness. And that is a very different way of posing this, making this description. And this description is not at all the description that we are given with the heart problem. But the heart problem makes mind/consciousness arise out of the brain and makes that be not physical in relation to the brain. And the problem is hard because people wonder, how can something physical, the brain, give rise to something non-physical, the mind? And my answer is that it's not the brain alone to begin with, and that mind is, in fact, necessarily a construction within the physicality of living elements, of living cells, some in the body, some in the brain, both interconnecting with a variety of chemical molecules.
And the metacognition, this awareness of our awareness, does that have some sort of reason to be? Is there a purpose for that feeling in your kind of homeostatic understanding of this?
Well, I mean, once you are, I mean, we started our conversation talking about all of these things that we get to know, all this knowledge that we accumulate, and that our brain supports, and that comes through the progressive detail with which we analyze the surrounding world, with which we analyze both the surrounding world, the world that surrounds our living organisms, as well as the way we analyze our own internal world through the process of science. Because not only am I allowed to get a very good description of the title of your program, as well as you as visual image, fantastic detail, color, shape, depth, and so forth. But I also can make a very deep analysis of what I am physically in terms of the kinds of cell types, the tissues, the molecules that animate them, and the fact that there are some cell types that happen to be of the so-called neural series. And they have different kinds of neurons, different kinds of connections of those neurons. And when you look at the nature, for example, one of the most important parts of Feeling and Knowing, the book, is the pointing to details of the physiology of feeling that have been ignored until now. Some are being discovered as we speak, and that really show a completely different physiology from the physiology that I used for the visual system. So for me to see you or to see the outside world, I need an extremely sophisticated system of extremely modern neurons and fiber systems, highly myelinated axons, purely synaptic contacts, ways that it has taken billions of years to refine that neuroanatomy and physiology that allows me to see or hear. On the other hand, when you look at the physiology that allows me to feel pain, or to feel hunger, for example, That's an extremely simple physiology. Most of the neurons don't even have myelin. Synapses are few and far between. You can have contacts of one neuron over another in the middle of an axon without necessarily having the contact at the synapse. You have structures of the nervous system completely at the mercy of the blood circulation, allowing molecules from the blood to interact directly with neurons. That's the old system that allows interoception and that allows this strange thing, which is not pure perception of the state of the body, but rather the interaction between the body and the nervous system.
But we haven't touched on what I might call, and this is probably the wrong kind of phraseology, I would call higher order conscious ideas, these kind of metacognition ideas. Let me just take an example out of the blue, like, for example, the feeling of intuitively disagreeing with somebody or agreeing with them, or the feeling of something being sacred, for example. These are what I would call higher order conscious feelings, which don't seem to have any relation to any sort of physical or evolutionary history. Do you take the sort of Dan Dennett side of things, where he's kind of saying all of that is really just an illusion of brain chemistry? Or do you think that those type of conscious ideas are of a higher order level?
Well, I don't think that they are illusions. I think they are what they are. I think that these are complex processes that come out of the enormous capacity and capabilities of our nervous systems. And there is a perfect place to talk mostly about nervous systems. Although, of course, you can never talk about nervous systems without talking about the rest of the body, because the nervous system is maintained by the rest of the body.
Are they epiphenomena of physicality? Is it just an epiphenomena in the sense that it's just a byproduct? Something, a byproduct of brain chemistry?
No, they're not a byproduct of brain chemistry. They are complex, highly detailed representations that we build in our minds thanks to an extremely complex nervous system that allows us to make representations of the world as it exists, but also representations of combinations of things that do not exist in the world, but can exist in our minds. And that is something that is being done by the nervous system in the ability to generate images, patterns. Images are, one can talk about images or about patterns or about maps, but brains naturally, especially through structures in the cerebral cortex, they make maps, they make patterns. And those patterns can be extremely sophisticated, especially because you can combine them in very numerous ways, and you can construct things that don't really exist already in the outside world, but things that exist only in your mind.
Very creative, this, in a way, isn't it? This ability.
Absolutely. Well, of course, we began asking me about creativity, and I was referring to these kinds of processes. And these kinds of processes are, of course, in your consciousness because they are in your mind. And as you're having them, you are aware of the fact that it is you that is having them, that they belong to you. You have a sense of ownership. The sense of ownership comes from your feeling of being there, your feeling of being a self on top of which there's a name, which is your name, and so forth. These are all, it's progressive constructions that you have made. Where they're all hooked is on this combination of your living organism and your mind. That combination, of course, is your living organism with your nervous system that is generating that combine.
Well, listen, Antonio, I won't take any more of your time. You've been very, very generous for me and the listeners to clarify all of this about feelings and how important they are in the evolution of consciousness and of thoughts. So it remains just for me to say thank you very, very much on behalf of all of the listeners, and wishing you all the very, very best with the new book. Thank you, Antonio.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you.